Nathan Cole was a name once spoken with pride, an Olympic cyclist, national hero, and symbol of discipline, until one rain-soaked night when he led police on a 126-mile-per-hour chase that turned his legacy into a national scandal. Nathan Cole had always been the kind of athlete who made everything look effortless. Born in a small town in the north of England, he started cycling when he was 8, riding old second-hand bikes through the hills behind his family's house. His father used to say Nathan was faster than the wind, and by the time he turned 16, that wasn't far from the truth. He won every local race he entered, and within a few years, he was competing internationally. At the Tokyo Olympics, he captured the nation's attention. His silver medal sprint was replayed across every television screen in the country. Reporters called him the Steel Cyclist because of his calm focus under pressure. Sponsors lined up, and soon his face appeared on cereal boxes and fitness ads. He had fame, money, and the admiration of millions. But beneath the success, something was shifting. Nathan's drive wasn't fueled by glory anymore. It was fueled by something much harder to control, a hunger for the rush. After the Olympics, things began to unravel quietly. A knee injury kept him off the bike for months, and that time away from training started to eat at him. The pressure from his coaches, the media, and his sponsors didn't stop just because his leg hurt. Everyone expected him to come back stronger, faster, and even more perfect. Nathan tried to keep up appearances, but his confidence started slipping. He wasn't sleeping well, and he spent nights scrolling through social media, watching videos of other athletes racing ahead while he sat at home. When he finally returned to competition, he wasn't the same. His times were slower, his focus weaker. Then came the failed drug test, a small amount of a banned stimulant found in his system. He insisted it was an accident, a contaminated supplement, but the damage was done. The headlines turned brutal overnight. Sponsors backed out, and his team quietly suspended him from competition. For the first time in his career, Nathan was off the track and out of control. That's when he found the car meets. Late-night gatherings in empty parking lots where engines roared and crowds cheered. It started innocently, watching others race, feeling the vibrations through the ground as cars launched into the night. But soon, the old thrill returned, the same electric pull he used to feel at the start line of a race. Only now, it wasn't about pedaling. It was about horsepower and speed limits. He bought a used sports car, learned how to modify it, and spent long nights driving through empty roads until dawn. To his friends, he said it was just stress relief, a hobby, something to clear his head. But those close to him noticed a change. He became distant, distracted, and obsessed with pushing limits. The same discipline that had made him an Olympic medalist now drove him toward danger. The line between training and chasing adrenaline began to blur. He was no longer the golden boy of British cycling. He was a man searching for something faster than himself, and he didn't care how far he had to go to find it. The night of the chase began like any other for Nathan. The sky was heavy with low clouds, and the roads shimmered with a thin layer of rain. He had been driving for hours, aimlessly moving from one empty stretch of road to another, the hum of the engine drowning out the noise inside his head. He was behind the wheel of a silver Audi R6, a car that didn't belong to him but felt like it did. It was powerful, quiet, and smooth, the kind of machine that responded instantly, like a heartbeat syncing with his own. For Nathan, driving fast had become a strange kind of therapy. It gave him a sense of control he no longer found anywhere else. Just past midnight, he reached a long, open stretch of highway that cut through the countryside. There were no cars, no lights, just the sound of the engine and the road beneath him. He pressed down on the accelerator, watching the numbers on the speedometer climb, higher and higher. The rush hit him like a wave. For a brief moment, he forgot everything. The career that had collapsed, the headlines that mocked him, the silence from his former teammates. It was just speed and space. But what he didn't know was that a patrol car had been sitting in a lay-by a few miles ahead. When the radar picked him up at 126 miles per hour, the officers inside the car could hardly believe what they saw. They pulled out onto the road and turned on their sirens, expecting the driver to slow down. Instead, the Audi surged forward. In an instant, the chase began. The flashing blue lights reflected in the wet tarmac as the two cars tore through the night. Nathan didn't look back. Every part of his body was focused, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the next curve. To him, it wasn't fear that took over. It was focus, the same clarity he once felt on the starting line of an Olympic final. The police called for backup, setting up roadblocks and deploying other units along the route. But Nathan seemed to know exactly where to go. He cut through narrow lanes, darted past farms, and slipped through small villages that blurred into streaks of light. Officers later said it was like chasing a ghost. He never hesitated, never slowed, always a few seconds ahead. The more they pushed, the more determined he became to stay free. The car's engine roared through valleys and across open plains, the sound echoing in the still night air. Minutes turned into half an hour, and the chase stretched across county lines. Fuel was burning fast, and police communications were filled with updates and warnings. The roads grew tighter, the corners sharper, yet Nathan kept his foot down. In those moments, he wasn't a fallen athlete or a man on the run. He was simply chasing a feeling he couldn't name, the same one that had driven him his entire life. By the time the officers realized how far he was willing to go, it was already too late to stop what was coming next. The end came suddenly, almost without warning. Nathan had been driving for nearly 40 minutes, his mind locked in a strange, focused calm that only speed could bring. The Audi's engine had been pushed to its limits, the tires cutting through wet asphalt as he tore across the border into Nottinghamshire. Police cars followed in the distance, their flashing lights flickering like distant lightning. A helicopter joined the pursuit overhead, its spotlight sweeping across the dark fields and winding roads. The chase had turned from a pursuit into a spectacle, with every passing mile pulling Nathan further away from reason. As he approached the outskirts of Nottingham, the road narrowed into a long curve that led to a small bridge. The rain had picked up, turning the surface slick and unforgiving. Nathan took the turn too fast. The rear tires lost traction for just a second, but that second was all it took. The car fishtailed, clipped the edge of a roundabout, and slammed sideways into a steel barrier. The sound was deafening. Metal twisting, glass shattering, the hiss of steam rising from the crushed hood. The Audi came to rest half on the road, half against the barrier, its headlights flickering in the darkness. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the sound of sirens grew louder as police cars closed in. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn, expecting a violent confrontation. But when they reached the wreck, they found Nathan slumped over the steering wheel, breathing heavily, his face streaked with sweat and rain. The airbags had deployed, saving him from the worst of the crash. He didn't move, just stared straight ahead as if he couldn't quite believe it was over. When they pulled open the door and let him out, he didn't resist. His eyes were unfocused, fixed on something far away. One of the officers later recalled how Nathan kept glancing at the shattered dashboard. The speedometer needle was frozen at exactly 126 miles per hour. It was a haunting image, the precise number that had defined the entire chase, locked forever in broken glass. Inside the car, investigators found a few personal items. An empty water bottle, a gym bag, and a small black notebook lying on the passenger seat. The pages were filled with messy handwriting, fragments of thoughts about a momentum, a perfect motion, and at the moment before control is lost. There were no names, no plans, just strange reflections that hinted at an obsession no one had understood. When Nathan was taken into custody, paramedics checked him for injuries. He had a few cuts and bruises but was otherwise unharmed. The police officers couldn't decide whether he was lucky or cursed. The car was a total loss, a mangled shell that would later be towed away as evidence. News of the chase spread quickly through the night, first over police radio, then through social media. By dawn, headlines were already calling it one of the most reckless pursuits in recent memory. The nation's former Olympic hero, the man once known for discipline and control, had been caught at the edge of disaster, his legacy shattered on a wet stretch of road. After the crash, Nathan's arrest made national news. The footage of his mangled Audi, flashing with blue lights and surrounded by officers, played on every channel. It was the kind of story that spread fast. An Olympic cyclist turned fugitive, caught after a high-speed chase. The public couldn't understand how someone who had represented their country could spiral so far from grace. Reporters waited outside the police station. Photographers shouted his name, but Nathan said nothing. He kept his head down, his face pale and unreadable. It wasn't anger or fear that showed in his expression, but exhaustion, as if the chase had drained the last of whatever had been keeping him together. When the investigation began, the police expected to find evidence of something bigger: stolen vehicles, drugs, or organized crime. What they found instead was something much stranger. Nathan's home was a quiet, detached house on the edge of town, filled with trophies, medals, and framed photos from his cycling career. To most people, it looked like a shrine to success. But behind the neatly arranged surface, there were signs of obsession. In his garage, investigators discovered shelves lined with car parts, turbochargers, custom exhausts, suspension kits, and a stack of high-performance tires. There were also several sets of false number plates, GPS trackers, and maps of rural roads marked with red lines and handwritten notes. On his laptop, they uncovered files labeled with single words: the pursuit, the speed, the flow. Each folder contained detailed notes about vehicle dynamics, police radio frequencies, and escape routes plotted across northern England. The level of detail shocked investigators. It wasn't the work of someone preparing for a single reckless drive. It was something deeper, more methodical, as if Nathan had been planning and testing for months. Yet there was no clear motive. He wasn't selling cars or hiding illegal goods. There were no financial transactions that suggested profit, no connections to anyone involved in crime. It seemed like he had built his own private world, dedicated to one thing: speed. The notebook found in his car only deepened the mystery. Pages were filled with scattered thoughts, sketches of roads, and short sentences like control is an illusion, another line between fear and focus. Psychologists later described his writings as a window into an obsessive mind, one driven by a need to reclaim a feeling that had long slipped away. To Nathan, speed wasn't about danger. It was about purity, precision, and the fleeting moment when everything else disappeared. What began as a coping mechanism after his fall from fame had turned into a dangerous pursuit of perfection. Friends who were interviewed later said they'd noticed his growing detachment. He stopped answering messages, skipped family visits, and spent most of his nights alone. Some thought he was training again, trying to rebuild himself for a comeback. In truth, he had already crossed a line. The same discipline that once made him an Olympic athlete now kept him locked in a pattern he couldn't escape. What police had uncovered wasn't the story of a criminal. It was the story of a man consumed by his own need for control, chasing a feeling he could never catch. The trial drew crowds from across the country. Reporters filled the courtroom, eager to capture every moment of the fallen athlete's downfall. Nathan sat quietly beside his lawyer, dressed in a plain gray suit, his once confident posture replaced by a subdued stillness. The prosecution presented the evidence: the chase footage, the speed readings, and the collection of modified car parts from his home. Each image seemed to push him further from the person people thought they knew. The defense spoke about stress, mental health, and the pressure of fame, but Nathan showed little reaction. He didn't argue, didn't make excuses, and didn't try to defend what he had done. When the footage of the chase was played on the screen, the courtroom fell silent. The sound of sirens, engines, and screeching tires filled the air. Nathan kept his eyes on the floor, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. When it was his turn to speak, he rose slowly. His voice was calm, almost detached. He said he hadn't wanted to hurt anyone, that he hadn't thought about the consequences. We described the drive as a moment of freedom, a blur where nothing else existed. There was no anger in his words, only exhaustion. The judge listened, then delivered the sentence: 2 years in prison for dangerous driving, reckless endangerment, and resisting arrest. Nathan nodded once and sat down, showing no sign of surprise. The verdict was expected. Inside prison, Nathan became a ghost of the man he once was. He kept to himself, rarely spoke to others, and spent hours reading or writing in notebooks that the guards later described as filled with reflections about movement and control. He wasn't violent or difficult, just distant, as if still caught in the rhythm of the chase that had ended long ago. To the outside world, he was quickly forgotten. His sponsors erased his image from advertisements, his cycling team removed his name from their records, and sports commentators avoided mentioning him during broadcasts. The name Nathan Cole became a quiet reminder of how quickly admiration could turn into disappointment. When he was released, there was no media waiting, No fanfare, no crowd. He walked out of the gates alone, carrying a small bag and a folded newspaper. For a while, no one knew where he went. Some said he moved abroad. Others claimed to have seen him riding his bike again along the coast. The truth was simpler. He disappeared from the spotlight entirely, choosing solitude over redemption. The house he once lived in was sold, and most of his trophies were auctioned off to collectors. Only a few close friends heard from him, and even they said his messages were brief and distant. Years later, a journalist researching the story visited the bridge where the crash had happened. The barrier had been repaired, the road resurfaced, but something unusual hung from the railing, a rusted bicycle chain, looped once and left to sway in the wind. No one knew who placed it there, but many believed it was Nathan's quiet goodbye to the life he had lost. It became a small, almost forgotten symbol of a man who had everything, lost it all, and vanished into his own silence. The legend of the 126-mile-per-hour chase lived on, not as a tale of rebellion, but as a haunting reminder of how far obsession can drive even the most disciplined soul.